My name's Sarah Biddulph and I'm the Director of the Asian Law Centre. And so I would first like to acknowledge that our gathering today and this meeting is on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Indigenous people who are present. And as this is being recorded, can I also add to pay our respects to the Indigenous people on the lands of the people who will be looking at this recording at the time they look at it. And so today we had two things which go together. So the first was to have a gathering so that all of our dear friends, our colleagues, our students were able to get together to socialise, to have a chat, and to get to see each other again. But the other most important thing is to welcome our old and very dear friend, Professor Dan Rosen, who is going to give a seminar today. My great colleague, Professor Peter Rush, will chair that session and take comments and questions and things like that. Dan, I have to tell you, has been a friend of the Asian Law Centre since sort of close to its inception, and certainly from when our inaugural director, Professor Malcolm Smith, went up to CHUO and they were colleagues together at CHUO. We've had a long and very friendly collaborative relationship with CHUO University, and Dan over the years has contributed greatly to the life of the Asian Law Centre, and he has been a friend and a mentor to all of us, to many of us here who know him. And so not just to thank him for coming to give the seminar, but to thank him for being a great friend of ours. So welcome.
With that introduction, I'm chairing, so I'm going to just say welcome to Dan. Again, great friend, has been a great support to me when I've been doing my work in Japan, and also to the centre when he comes out here. Always look forward to his talks, very exciting, informative, and
lower expectations, please.
Yeah, he told me to lower expectations. I refused the invitation to lower expectations. But without further ado, prosecutorial misconduct, which is actually supposed to be somebody with a speech pattern.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah's already gone. I was going to say thank you, Sarah, but she's in a hasty retreat. Thank you all for coming. It's really a big turnout. I have felt we might have a little bit more because Ed Sheeran got 100,000 the other night, right? And he didn't have free food or free mango juice or anything. So I felt we might at least get 50,000 or something. But anyway, I'm very happy to see all of you and so many of my old friends. As Sarah said, I want to just take a moment and remember Malcolm Smith, who was the founding director of the Asian Law Center. And Malcolm built this, and then he decided around the age of 60 that he was ready for a new challenge. And so he came to CHUO University at the same time that I did, actually, when the law school system started there. And it was because of Malcolm that I became introduced to Melbourne Uni, and Australia and Melbourne and this institution have become a really important and beloved part of my life for the last almost 20 years. So I thank Malcolm very much, and AC and Peter, and there's Hayden Opie in the corner there, and many people, Helen and many others who have, Andrew, who have made me feel so welcome here. Catherine, you were present for Ed Sheeran the other night, right? Yeah, yeah. 100,000, is that right? And nothing was free, right? No free food? Or... Okay, so today we're talking about prosecutorial misconduct. Now, what might that be? Oh, what's that? Oh, turn it this way. So everybody who is from Japan knows that image. You see this image all the time. In Japan. My former student over there knows it very well. Do you know what that is? Do you know what that is a picture of? Any idea? You know, Andy? You know, okay, well, then you go. Well, it's prosecutors, right? It's prosecutors. And whenever the the prosecutors want to launch a big investigation and to sort of mark the territory that we're looking at you now, they do this. They bring in big teams of somber-looking people, and they all get the seats in the same place, and maybe they get a discount or something like that with these bags, and they march into wherever the target office is. This one happened to be when they raided the Olympus company a few years ago. Well, it's been more than 10 years ago. But it's a very typical scene. So after that, the next scene is loading of the boxes. This is a very important element in the drama. First, the prosecutors march in with the briefcases, and then they march out with the boxes, and they load the boxes. And of course, the TV cameras and the photographers, still photographers are all there. And this is all reported in the evening news and in the papers the next morning. So what's the point of this? I mean, what's this show about? I think that when Japanese people see this, what they're really seeing is this. This is the image that the prosecutors want to show, that we are, resistance is futile, right? We're coming to get you, and all you can do is just cooperate and preferably plead guilty, and everything will work out. So here's another somewhat more recent example. Carlos Ghosn, who was the head of Nissan company, who was alleged to have engaged in misdeeds, although there's a strong counter story that maybe he was set up by the company because they were unhappy about his relationship with Renault company, which was in an alliance. Anyway, here are prosecutors raiding his office, Tokyo Public Prosecutor's Office. Okay, so here's some more prosecutors with boxes, but wait a minute. Hatoko Sensei, what is this from? Can you read at the bottom there? Drama. Yeah, it's from a TV drama. Those are not real prosecutors. Those are from the drama special about TV prosecutors. So this image, which appears in the news all the time, then bleeds over into popular entertainment. And so here are some prosecutors, again, from the drama, of course, going through the boxes, which have been collected there on the scene. And I say this is sort of the myth, what I call it, prosecutorial misconduct. What is it? What is a myth? This is some dictionary story, a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of the people, explaining some natural or social phenomenon, typically involving supernatural beings. Well, I think the prosecutors would certainly like to be considered in that way, but some kind of story that just, persists throughout the culture. Or a myth could be a widely held but false belief or idea. Well, they certainly wouldn't want you to think that. Or an exaggerated or idealized conception of a person or thing. Well, maybe that fits, huh? The myth of the prosecutors. So let's see how the prosecutors themselves promote this myth. This is a screen grab from a video that you can find online. It's a recruiting video trying to get young people to join the prosecutorial service. And, here's this very majime-looking guy. Majime means kind of serious-minded guy. Here's a woman. She says, I'm devoted to social justice. And if you are too, you should become a prosecutor, basically, is the image. And so here they are in the recruiting video, walking through the prosecutorial office, giving somebody the evil eye as they caught him in a lie or something. And of course, loading boxes, right? Loading boxes is an essential part of the job. So here they are loading the boxes of the evidence, putting it into the van. And so the recruitment, there are more boxes. When you get them back to the office, then you've got to put them up on, in Australia, would this be an attractive job site, do you think so? You can have a great job loading boxes, putting them on the wall. But apparently it works in Japan. And so this is what they do. And then if you're really lucky, you can ride in the car. And on a very good day, you can run the lights too, right? So this is the myth that they want to present to the public about if young people, if you would just be a prosecutor, you could have this really exciting life. Maybe you sensei will change your mind and move from the lawyer's route to the prosecutorial route after seeing all these boxes, right? So here's some more prosecutors. Uh-oh, but wait a minute, they're actors. These are actor prosecutors. And these prosecutors come from a TV drama that was on 4 or 5 years ago, I guess now. Seigi no Se. Seigi is like justice. Seigi no Se. It's sort of like justice from the start or something like that. Is that like from the beginning? What do you think that means? Yeah, well, something like, kind of from the very beginning justice or something like that. It was a weekly TV drama on Wednesday nights in Japan. They look like the people in the real prosecutors video, don't they? These are movie prosecutors. And here you can see, I think it's a bloody vase. Somebody has gone down and this lady is being questioned and she doesn't look very happy and she looks pretty skeptical and he's just, looking prosecutorial. These are the investigators, supposedly. And the story is this young woman who becomes a prosecutor and she's having trouble balancing her love life and her professional life. So she makes a move to this new prosecutorial office and she says, from now on, I'm going to do both well. I'm going to have a great love life and I'm going to have a great work life. Okay, back to real prosecutors. What kind of life do you have as a prosecutor in Japan? So here's their recruiting material. At the top is for the sort of lawyer prosecutors. And then there are also, the kind of investigatory people, the people who are not lawyers, but who go out and gather the boxes, and stuff like that. So if you want to be a prosecutor, you have to pass the bar exam and maybe do some other things. Or if you want to be an investigator or a helper, you have to have done other things and had some experience. And you see they're all ready to go. Please run to be a prosecutor. They say, you can have a great life. You have to have an interview first, but here's what will happen. Look at all these happy prosecutors. You'll have a very happy life as a prosecutor. You get Sundays and holidays off. You work until you work 7 hours and 45 minutes, it says, a day. I'm not sure this really applies to the lawyering prosecutors, maybe to the investigators, or maybe it's just another myth. What do you think? Think it's just a myth? Yeah. So 7 hours and 45 minutes, 20 holidays in a year. This flex time off for, where is it? For parenting, somewhere it says here. And then you have a great work-life balance if you become a prosecutor. I guess that was the problem that the actress was struggling with, right? Her love life and her professional life, but she's become a prosecutor. So now let's turn to prosecutorial misconduct. Right? We've talked about the myth, but what about misconduct? Unfortunately, in the last decade or so, there have been seemingly endless cases of prosecutorial misconduct. This is one in which the lead prosecutor in a case tampered with a floppy disk that had evidence on it and readjusted the evidence to suit the story that the person was being prosecuted under. It was so egregious that the US wrote Japan up in their annual human rights report. They do a worldwide evaluation of human rights every year. And in 2011, they wrote Japan up as a place in which fair public trial might be in question, because they said, court convicted and sentenced this prosecutor to 18 months in prison for falsifying evidence and then concealing it. It was really egregious case. There was a woman who was pretty high-ranking public official, and they said she was misusing the postal privileges, which she really wasn't. But then he doctored the evidence to show that allegedly she had. Well, and then Japan got written up again the next year because his bosses had concealed this, you know? So he tampered with the evidence. He went to prison. They got written up by the US. And then the next year, the chief prosecutor and the deputy chief, his bosses, got convicted for the crime of concealing the falsification of evidence, which they knew about. And so the US wrote them up again. And they also were sentenced to prison, but suspended for 3 years. Well, and then there's the matter of what Carlos Ghosn called hostage justice system. You know, Ghosn was in the Japanese system, the prosecutors could hold you for a long time and question you without a lawyer. And then there's a certain number of days. But then if they charge you with a different offense, then they hold you for another, how many days is it? Like 20 something days, do you know?
20 days.
28?
20 days.
Yeah, 28 days and then another charge 28 days and 20 days. So he was, you know, incommunicado for months being questioned, and he began to criticize Japan's system as a hostage justice system. That means, you know, you're kept as a hostage until you plead guilty. Once you plead guilty, then, you know, you can come out for a minute and then you'll be sentenced to some kind of prison term. And I don't know if you know the story, but eventually he escaped. It was a very dramatic thing. He cooked up, he got some people to smuggle him out. Eventually he got out on bail. You know, they refused to let him out on bail. They refused to let him out. They refused to let him out. He got a new lawyer. And I happened to hear this lawyer talk right after Ghosn had gotten out. He was giving a speech. And this lawyer is known as the guy who could get you out on bail when nobody else can. And he said, okay, we convinced the judge, you know, they took away his passport. We agreed to all these conditions. They can watch him all the time. And so the judge released him. So this guy was very proud. And then about a week later, Ghosn escaped, you know. And the reason he said he escaped was he said there was no hope of a fair trial, he said. Also, they were going to put some new charges against him. And he said, I'm going to be here for another year, just in prison. So he escaped. Anyway, so he called it the hostage justice system. Here's the flow chart that the Justice Ministry shows of the progression of a criminal case. So I keep talking and calling on Hatoko says she used to be my student. So you see anything missing from that chart? Like at the far right, is there anything missing? This is about, you know, indictment and progression and what happens. Where's not guilty?
Oh.
Not there. No. They don't even consider the possibility that somebody might be acquitted of the charge. So this whole chart of do this, you know, go to jail or something. There's no possibility in the Justice Department's mind that you might be not guilty of the offense. So that's what Ghosn was concerned about. You know, he said that once you're indicted, there's no chance. Of course, the prosecutor's office says that's because we only indict people that we really know are guilty and that we have the evidence for. You know, we let a lot of people go. So that's their explanation. Okay. Well, here's a mixture now of myth and myths and reality and fiction. This is a movie that was based on a true story of a person who was accused, a man who was accused of groping someone on a train. And he said, I didn't do it. And the name of it is Soridemo Boku wa Yatenai, means, well, even so, I didn't do it. Even so means like, even if you say I did it, I didn't. And the headline says, not having done it is not the same thing as not guilty. And so the story book and the trial and the movie were about his frustrations at insisting he didn't do this thing of which he was accused, but trying to get a not guilty verdict through the Japanese system. This is a review of the movie by Jeff Kingston. Jeff Kingston is a historian who works at Temple University in Japan. And he's been in Japan many years. And he said, what do we learn from this? He said, in the end, viewers learn the judicial system is choreographed by prosecutors who never back down or admit a mistake while securing a conviction trumps serving justice. In other words, he said that for prosecutors, getting a guilty verdict is more important than finding the truth, and that this movie is just an illustration of that. In the prosecutors' offices themselves, as we saw with the case of the prosecutor who falsified the evidence, there have been other problems. Here's an example of the chief prosecutor of the Tokyo the prosecutor's office. He was the prime minister at the time, Prime Minister Abe, who was the one who, sad to say, was assassinated later on after he was no longer prime minister, or after he was prime minister. Abe had wanted to make this guy the chief prosecutor of Japan, but he was already over the age limit. And so Abe and the government tried to tinker with the system to make a way to get this guy in. And there was a lot of public unhappiness about that, that you're abusing the system just to get your guy in. And I guess the allegation is that this guy was kind of sympathetic to Abe's point of view. But anyway, while this was going on, the conference was going on, he went and played mahjong, which is a crime for money. You know? In the middle of this whole controversy about whether he can be the chief prosecutor of Japan, he went to a mahjong parlor and started playing mahjong gambling, right? And it's a crime. At the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was being told stay out of rooms, don't get together with other people, stay home, social distance, and in the middle of all that, he was found to be. He played with some news reporters. I think that's how it got out, and so the nation was under a state of emergency under the coronavirus pandemic. That's one thing. He's getting together with people, and he's gambling. So it was discovered, and he was arrested, and eventually he resigned. Well, I don't know, was he arrested? He was discovered, and he resigned. So the question is he going to be prosecuted? Will the prosecutor be prosecuted? And the government decided not to prosecute him. Yeah, he's resigned, he's suffered enough. So, of course, there were suspicions that the fix was in. And the justice minister said, oh, no, we didn't intervene in the process. The political part of Japan didn't get involved in this Justice Department decision. This didn't come from the prime minister. The prosecutors themselves just decided that it wasn't worth prosecuting. So in Japan, there is a system in which citizens panel can overrule the prosecutor's decision about whether or not to prosecute someone. So the prosecutors decided not to prosecute. A citizens inquest panel was convened. They said this guy should be prosecuted. And so that meant that they had to reinvestigate him. So they did, and they brought a summary indictment against the prosecutor for the gambling. And that would allow him pay about $5,000 and basically go home. And so that's what they did. The prosecutors said, we decided not to prosecute him because it wasn't a lot of money. But the inquest said, but he's the chief prosecutor. If the prosecutors are not following the law, who is? How can we expect anybody to follow the law? So they went forward. And so that was what happened in the end. He got this summary indictment and a small kind of slap on the wrist, as we said. Well, the Justice Ministry realizes that it has a problem. In 2019, in their white paper, they acknowledged that there was a decline in public confidence in investigations and trial proceedings by prosecutors. So the Justice Minister established a review committee. The committee made recommendations. A bill went to the Diet, and the Diet passed the law in 2015, enacted in 2016. Some of the things that it introduced were video and voice recordings of interrogations. And the other two are sort of like plea bargaining, which never had been present in the Japanese system until then. You know, number two is if you agree, you know, you're the small fish, you agree to cooperate, we'll dismiss the allegations against you, and you have to testify for the big fish. And then transactional immunity, same kind of thing. Also, expansion of wiretapping, public prosecutors, public defenders, a more systematic listing of what it is, what the evidence is in the case. Transparency, I think would be the right word, transparency. And so here was the Justice Minister at that time. And she says, we're going to have these big reforms. And she herself admitted, you know, shortcomings in the administration that have drawn public criticism in Japan and abroad. I think that means especially the US State Department and the Human Rights Report. She says we need to create public trust again in the prosecutors. And she set up some working groups for prosecutors to refresh their knowledge on ethical duties and the ideals of the office. In other words, rediscover the myth, right, that we're fearless, public-spirited, justice-minded people who only want to seek the truth. And she said, she thought the root of the problems in the prosecutorial office and the Justice Department was a working culture that suppressed the voices of workers, leaving many shortcomings overlooked. I'm not sure. It sounds like she thinks these prosecutors would have said, I would like to be ethical, but you won't listen to me talk about being ethical, so I'm just going along with the you know, the way things are done. Sort of like this minister the other day I read, forgive me, I'm not Australian, but the minister who testified or said the other day, I knew that I was telling a lie when I testified that this, what is this?
Robo-debt.
Yeah, robo-debt. I knew that was not truthful, but it was my duty as a minister to do it. Now, I may have mischaracterized what happened. I'm not Australian. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. But I mean, it sounds sort of like, you know, the idea that, well, if people could be listened to and speak in their own voice, they would do the right thing, but they feel constrained by the system to do what the system has always done. Okay, here's another justice minister. Here's a justice minister who went to jail over vote buying. You know, he's an elected member, public official, member of the Diet. His wife also was running for the Diet, and he was convicted of handing out money to get people to vote for his wife to help her win election to the Diet. And that was discovered, and eventually he was convicted and sentenced to 3 years in prison and fined a pretty small amount of money, isn't it? $12,000 for this. This is the justice minister, right? Who's head on. We have the top prosecutor, the top Tokyo prosecutor violating the law. We have the justice minister violating the law. That's truly misconduct. So my conclusion is certainly we don't need any more misconduct by prosecutors. And probably we don't need much more misconduct. We just need good conduct. I have a bonus. Ordinarily, the presentation would end here, but wait, there's more. Hi, prosecutors. This is a drama that appeared a couple of years ago on Thai television about prosecutors, Dare to Love. And it was not so popular until the government criticized it. The prosecutors, who apparently were not happy about the way that they were portrayed in this drama, started complaining, and that drove the ratings up. So now everybody wanted to see, what are they complaining about? So Dare to Love. The Office of the Attorney General said some of the contents were unacceptable, especially the episode in which a public prosecutor offers a job to his ex-girlfriend to get her back. That would never happen. And so the prosecutors contacted the producer and said, fix this. And the producer is going to talk to the media. It's fiction, right? It's fiction, right? But the producer said, I'll talk to the media to clarify the show's stance. So here's the story. The prosecutor invites the woman to join the guy invites the woman to join the team. He says, think about it. You know, it's a passport to opportunity. You can become a judge, politician, you can help society. That's the last one, right? Help society. She says, nah, I don't think I want to be a prosecutor. And the guy who was the trying to get her in, apparently is kind of a bad boy type prosecutor. He's startled that his invitation is rebuffed by her. And so critics, it says, lawyers and law students criticize the show for failing to get the details of the legal process right. Well, it's a TV show, right? It's not. Anyway, if you'd like to see it, you can find it. There it is. I think it has English subtitles. Handsome young boy who secretly falls in love with his beautiful senior at school. She becomes a smart and talented lawyer. He becomes a handsome student, completed his studies. He tries to win her heart. And then I guess he goes to become a prosecutor and then tries to get her to join, but she says, no, thank you. Does it have a happy ending? I don't know. I didn't see the show. Okay, well, thanks very much. Are Australian prosecutors like that? Anybody have, no? Regan, do you have direct contact with prosecutors sometimes in your?
Some of my friends do that work, but they have very strict ethical obligations, which are higher than most other lawyers. Yeah,
and typically prosecutors, are they not government lawyers before they have a career as barristers to solicitors before they become prosecutors, or how does that work? I mean, in Japan, the system is you go, you finish the law training, and then you choose. You're going to be a prosecutor or a judge or lawyer and basically stay on that track. Unlike the US where people go back and forth. How about here?
Well, people come from lots of different ways. I know some people who worked for the Office of Public Prosecution and then have come to the bar. Yeah. But other people just did criminal defense work and then started doing prosecution as well.
Oh, yeah. In the US, it usually goes government to private, rather than private. Although at the higher levels, people do go back and forth. Well, do you have any questions I can answer for you, or any complaints I can receive from you? Does it sound at all? Yeah. Amanda. Yeah, Amanda, yes, please.
Thank you, that was fascinating. I've never watched Japanese prosecution series, but I've watched a lot of Korean ones. And it strikes me that the Korean justice trial prosecution sort of genre, they're much readier to criticize the prosecutors and collusion between the upper ranks and cooperation with corrupt politicians, for example. There's usually an ethical junior prosecutor who's trying to do the right thing and is stymied by the unethical upper echelons. So it's a sort of internal conflicts within the prosecution, the prosecutor's system. and also wider issues of justice and corruption within Korea. They're very critical, even the ones with a strong romantic theme through them and a lot of melodrama, still have a real biting edge to them. Is that also what happens?
Well, I don't. My impression is that the TV shows and the movies tend to be kind of promoting of this myth most of the time. But I don't know. What do you think? Are there many like TV dramas or things that are critical of?
In Japan, I don't think there is a much criticism in the drama series.
My impression is they tend to kind of play up the myth, you know.
Yeah, I think so.
Prop it up, and so so it does, you know, each side kind of pushes the other one up. You get the news stories, and then you get the TV shows, which look almost exactly like the news stories, and then the prosecutors then make their own videos for recruiting, and they look like the TV shows, which look like the news stories, and it's a kind of a self-referential perpetual motion system, you know. Yeah,
Thanks, Dan. We've all heard about the high conviction rates in Japan.
Yeah.
And that could either be because, as you suggested, or as you mentioned in terms of the argument for that, a lot of prosecutors don't take something to trial unless they're certain that the defendant is guilty.
Yes.
If that's the case, then there must be a lot of crimes that go
unprosecuted
or unprosecuted.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there might be problems to do with the justice system. And so in your view, what is the answer to that? The high rate of conviction.
Yeah.
Is it sort of on each side that explains the high conviction rate, or is there genuinely a problem with the justice system?
I think a 99% conviction rate is suspicious. You know, I mean, there's very little in human activity that has 99% success rate, right? So I think that's suspicious from the beginning. There's just the system has existed this way for so long that there's the strong expectation by everyone that once you get indicted, once that happens, it's like Dante's Inferno, abandon all hope, you know, ye who enter here. There's just no way out, like the chart. There's no conception of a not guilty result. So is it because people are biased from the beginning? I think they're just expecting that once that decision has been made, the prosecutors wouldn't have prosecuted you if they didn't think, you know, you were guilty. That's what, I'm not a judge, but that's probably what everybody in the system thinks. And so then the prosecutors say, well, of course we wouldn't have prosecuted you if we didn't think you were guilty. But it's what's the right word? The cause and effect are kind of mirrors of each other. I don't know, anyone
might take into account though that the prosecution system sits in relation to other pre-trial, pre-prosecution processes. So there are diversions out into other regulatory systems. So that's not to say that it's 99% is good, but it might explain why you get such high numbers and why, when they're saying they get in Japan, they all say it, everybody says it, is that it's because we just think not that they're guilty, that we think we'll get the guilty verdict. And all the other parts have been kind of shifted off to juvenile justice systems, into family systems, into community regulation, etc. And that kind of functions to maintain the myth of the prosecutor as much as has a social function as well.
Interesting. Yes, Hayden.
Dan, does that say anything about the judicial system, that they accept the prosecution too easily? They're not critical and penetrating in their assessment of evidence?
Well, I think so. And you know, here's a strange feature of the Japanese system. Every lawyer, prosecutor, and judge in Japan has gone to the same law school. And by that, I mean that at the end of the educational process, for example, she's a lawyer, before anyone can take the next step, you have to go to what's called the Judicial Training Institute. And the Judicial Training Institute is the government institution that then takes you for another year and a half and inculcates in you all of the mores, you know, of that, what they want you to do and how they want you to act and think before you can become admitted. So, you know, there's a lot of group think, you know, the system, everybody ends up thinking much the same way, or at least being educated much the same way. And so the judges and the prosecutors are often very close, I think, in their way of thinking. And so the judges don't, this is my view, don't take the hard look. You know, they tend to just accept prosecutors' proffers of evidence in a way that's not very skeptical. I don't know, am I being unfair, do you think, to judges?
Oh, there was a Japanese judge sitting in the corner there.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, okay.
No, I mean, she's just left.
Oh, okay.
Too bad, we could have asked her.
Yeah. What do you, am I being unfair, do you think, to judges? Or Japanese judges, are they too willing to accept the view of prosecutors, do you think? 日本裁判官は検事は必ず信じることですか?
You're right. In most cases, for 2 or 3 years, same judge and same prosecutors are working together in every cases, right? In judicial trial, in criminal trial. So they are like becoming friends.
Team members.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it makes that teamwork makes it might be more difficult for judges to see the cases from the, you know, with criticism.
So the judges and the prosecutors are working together as a team. How about the lawyers or defense lawyers? Were they?
Defense lawyers is always different, right? Depending on cases. So yeah. So from that perspective, I think the Japanese criminal trials might be biased.
Yeah. So it's like the government team, judges and prosecutors on one side.
Yeah.
And then the.
Yeah, I think it's very unfair from the side of the lawyers.
So you got a better answer from me.
Yeah. I was going to actually thank you very much. I thought that was a very interesting comment. One of the other things that the Japanese, especially judiciary, is very famous for is that the judges do not stay in one court or in one position for very long. It's like it's less than 10 years, I think.
Oh, much less. Much less.
And so I would imagine, yes, during that time they would get cozy with the prosecutors, but then they move on. And so,
of course, prosecutors and judges are moving around all over the country. In 2 years or 3 years, but but you know, for some time they work together all the time on every case. So
thank you very much.
I know a lot of Japanese judges, and I don't think ill of them at all. But I think just the system doesn't encourage them to push. I don't know, Stacey, what do you think?
I know a lot of Japanese judges who have studied here. I know quite a number of prosecutors across Korea and Japan, and they're very careful not to socialize with each other. They don't socialize or be friendly. And partly it's difficult because when they're in a small country town, when they've been posted there, for example, there may only be 2 or 3 people with a legal qualification in the whole area. So they're actually quite careful about that sort of thing. However, you're right, in a daily court process, you're seeing the same people come through. That's no different to being in Geelong, Albury, Wodonga, in a small country town in Australia either. And then you have the added check and balance is what it was designed for, that people get moved around in Japan. So I think the judicial perspective is probably more around what Dan's saying, the myth that a judge is going to be just as accepting as other people, perhaps, that if something's come to court, yeah, there's a very good chance that this person has actually done it. So my question to you, Dan, is over the last decade or so, is the lay people being more introduced into the Japanese criminal justice system, whether it be as lay participation in a quasi-jury, for want of a better word, or in some of the victim processes, etc., that have now been introduced. Have we seen any changes in?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Saskia, Stacey Steele. It's a very Stacey Steele kind of question.
You're in there in Japan the last 5 years, because a lot of us haven't been able to travel to Japan the last few years.
So the system she's talking about was innovated about 10 or so years ago, in which there are groups of citizens who sit together with judges for the most serious criminal kinds of cases, Saibanin Seido, right? And this was partially promoted as a check, on judges who might not be, as dutiful to their responsibilities as you would hope. But it's actually turned out to be the opposite. Actually, the citizens have turned out to be more quick to convict than the professional judges. The judges have been, at least anecdotally, saying, well, hold on a second, wait a second here. We go through the evidence step by step before we reach a decision. So that hasn't had that kind of effect.
What about on the prosecutors then? What's been the outcome, do you think, for the prosecutors?
Of the victim?
Maybe the myth concept you were talking about, has it had any impact at all on the myth? Or are lay people now seeing they're almost in their own courtroom drama now because they're actually in the courtroom?
I know it's kind of calmed down in the last year or so, but everything did during COVID, except for this guy. I haven't heard of any big scandals recently among the prosecutors. And I don't know if some of these innovations that Justice Minister spoke about, whether they have had some effect. Maybe they have let people speak more freely in office meetings and talk about the problems. But of course, Golan, was relatively recently, and he certainly doesn't think that prosecutors had become any more enlightened. The prosecutors really expect you to plead guilty, right? That's the expectation. The trial is kind of an aberration. Once you're prosecuted, we're going to question you and, think of your family, think of your reputation, don't put the whole country through this, trauma. Why don't you just confess now and make it easy on yourself and everybody? So that attitude, I think, still is pervasive. CHUO University, where I teach, by the way, produces a lot of prosecutors for one reason.
And have they looked at it from a financial perspective? Like, what are there financial incentives for people to be behaving the way that they're behaving? Is there, one of the arguments many years ago was a lack of ability to actually properly investigate. So don't worry about the investigation. We'll just get a conviction because we don't have the money or the resources. And one thing that struck me with the boxes, where's the laptops? Where's the
I know, isn't it funny?
So is there a lack of people who have those skills then perhaps to let prosecutors go in a different direction?
I think the prosecutors are pretty, talented people. I mean, they've gone. It's a very small funnel, as you know, to get to be a licensed lawyer, judge, or prosecutor. And so they're very capable people. The staff people, I think, are capable. I think they've got plenty of money. But there's the mindset, it's like police officers. I don't have the data here, but my anecdotal feeling is a lot of people go to become a police officer and they really want to help society and do a good job. But after day, year after year of coming in contact with people at the most traumatic moments and the worst parts of society, they get ground down by that. They just get ground down by that. And they just want to get through the day without any difficulties. And I suspect that a lot of that happens with the prosecutors too. But as you said, they do, like the judges, they move them around every 3 years. And that's for independence. That's so they don't get too connected to a particular place. there's an argument about judges about, whether this is used in a political way. In other words, does the government look at your record as a judge, and if you've decided too many cases against the judge, then move you to the traffic court, in some outlying island, just to sort of put a lid on you. And there's evidence on both sides, I think. Yeah, Andrew.
Just as a follow-up, is it possible that the system is designed in a way that makes it less easy to acquit somebody on a technicality? In other words, somebody's done something wrong, the system is flexible enough to accommodate a conviction, even though it may not satisfy all of the requisite elements. And is it a different notion of justice, maybe, from our notion of justice, where you apply the law? If somebody's if there's an issue in terms of applying the law, the person is acquitted, whereas there's more a question in Japan as to whether something wrong has occurred, and therefore whether somebody should be punished as a result.
Or that you should take responsibility. I think that's a big issue. If you plead guilty, it's like, okay, you've accepted responsibility, we'll go light on you. And thinking about after the trial, certainly compared to the United States, I don't have the data again, but I'm pretty sure there are many more suspended sentences in Japan. You get sentenced to a term of years in prison, like 3 years in prison, suspended for 5 years. Means if you don't get in trouble in some other way for 5 years, then you don't have to go to prison. So the sentences tend not to be, there's more leniency on the outside, and especially if you've owned up to it, So I guess to be fair, we should keep that as part of the system, consider that as part of the whole system too. But again, Carlos Ghosn wasn't very sad. His associate, what's his name now? The guy from Nashville. Anyway, he was lawyer with Nissan when Ghosn was there. Ghosn escaped. The lawyer-ranking guy didn't escape, didn't try to escape. He got prosecuted. He said, this is all a sham. It went on for a long, long time. Basically, he was acquitted of almost everything except for one very minor offense. And, they sentenced him, I think, suspended sentence. The American ambassador to Japan greeted him with a kind of congratulatory, I can't remember the hug or a handshake. But imagine this guy just got convicted of a crime in Japan, but the American ambassador greeted him like he had escaped from, some kind of oppressive totalitarian regime, said congratulations, and then he got on the plane and went back to America. So the prosecutors, many people think the judges needed to give the prosecutors a little something to avoid losing face, because if they'd been found not guilty about everything, it would have been a disaster. So they found him not guilty of this very small offense out of all the others, and they could say, okay, well, we got him. But the real story is they didn't have the evidence against him, and even the judges were unconvinced of that. And I just found it amazing that the sight of the American ambassador embracing somebody, who had just been convicted of a crime, as if he had escaped from some kind of totalitarian regime.
Can I pose a question? Take up your last comment.
Yeah.
You said perhaps we need good conduct.
Yeah.
It wasn't clear from your talk what the good conduct might be. So perhaps.
Well, I think maybe living up to the myth. I mean, to the other version of the myth, which is like the ideal conduct, like looking at the evidence. And of course, this is an issue everywhere, right? America, prosecutors often are inclined to overreach, I think, right? But a good prosecutor, I think, is someone who looks at the evidence, doesn't have a lot of ego involved in it. It's not about me, whether I get a conviction. It's just about, do we think this person has done this crime, number one? And number two, do we have enough evidence to prove that? And then just to make a dispassionate judgment about that. That's what I think is good prosecutorial conduct. Yeah.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Everyone's
thank you for the wonderful praise.
I just have a question regarding the interplay between misconduct and misconduct.
Yeah.
How do you think misconduct actually react with misconduct?
Yeah.
Does this rigid image of a Japanese prosecutor reinforce or another way shelter the prosecutors from public criticism?
Yeah.
Or this misconduct actually helps us to undermine the misconduct, to actually expose the misconduct?
Yeah. My impression is that the misconduct kind of insulates them from a lot of criticism, which exacerbates the tendency toward misconduct. You know, it's like they have all this goodwill built up. You know, like if you and I are friends, and well, let's say somebody, Catherine, I've known for 20 years almost, right? So Catherine and I are good friends. I've known her for 20 years. And if somebody said, you know, Catherine the other day, she stole a sandwich from the business department's reception. You know, I'd be inclined not to believe that. Catherine wouldn't do that, you know, because there's the myth of Catherine, right? And then if she was eating the sandwich, you know, I'd say, oh, well, it's just a little sandwich, right? So I would first be inclined not to believe it. And secondly, if I was forced to believe it, I think I would minimize the consequences of it, you know? And I think that's what the myth does. The myth says prosecutors are great, they're honest, they're truthful, they're hardworking. And so when something happens, no, they wouldn't do it. Oh, well, if they did it, it's not so bad. And so that then just kind of emboldens them to, you know, I think like the guy in Osaka. I mean, this is pretty severe. They prosecuting this poor woman for postal offenses. She didn't do it. He's got the floppy disk. He says it happened here. It wasn't there, and he just moved the data apparently. You know, that's a pretty bold thing to do. And why did he think he could? Why would he want to do it? And then why would he think he could get away with it? And I think it's because he thought part of it is that he's kind of protected by the myth, prosecutor to do no wrong. Will the misconduct end up shattering the myth? That's another question. I haven't seen so much evidence of that happening. Have I worn out my welcome?
No, you haven't worn out your welcome. You've given us a lot to think about.
Okay. Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed.
That's an amazing presentation focused on prosecutors, but opening up to a range of other areas of criminal justice system. And I suspect also questions about the state as a different kind of form of state than we might have in this country or in the US, etc. But also relations between the various officials in it. And on that, I'll just add one point. I was interviewing police and prosecutors around one of the reforms that Dan mentioned, the introduction of audio-visual recording. And at the end of a 3-hour interview with a prosecutor, the lawyer prosecutor, not the investigative prosecutor, he was saying, oh, this is the law, this is the way it goes, this is their policy. And I reminded him that a High Court judge had actually just criticized this, and this was not the policy and it wasn't the law. And he turned to me and he said, but that judge disrespects the prosecutor all the time. I think that's, in some senses, one of the striking features that I've had in my work in Japan is that the actual relationship between the hierarchical relationship between judge and prosecutor is very, very different in Japan to it is here. That's not to say it's good or bad. It's just, it's a different one.
I have to apologize to you and to you. I have hay fever today. And so my nose is kind of stuffed up. And
so thanks very much, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.